All right, here is part 4 of my series on Christian marriage. And this is going to be biblical polygamy. Now, last time in our session on monogamy, I discussed how 1 Corinthians 7:2 is not actually a command for monogamy, even though that's how I had previously taught it, and actually paints a picture about how a man can have multiple wives, but a woman can only have one husband. I'm not going to reproduce that in this video because there's so much more to be said. I'll probably run overtime on this, and I won't even get to the half of it. So, although thinking about it now, it might be worth making a whole separate video just on that verse and the differences between the two relevant words and some other things, because it's a packed verse. There's a lot more in it than just that. And you're probably not going to be all that convinced by my small blurb in the last video. It might take really actually digging into it and getting the visuals up a little bit better. So part of the reason that there's so much to be said about this is because somewhere along the line, the culture that we've all been raised in, it decided really independently that the Bible portrays legitimate marriage as only between one man and one woman. Where we got this idea, I'm not really sure, because we certainly didn't get that from the Bible. But that's how it is. And so the whole concept has become sort of taboo, which means for the most part, every instance of polygamy in the Bible automatically gets put into the naughty box, or at least the ignorant box, and promptly forgotten. So what happens to all those types and shadows and pictures that we're supposed to be looking for? Well, I'll tell you, they go completely unobserved, because you can't look for God's purpose very well in something that you condemn out of hand. I mean, you don't look for God's purpose in idol worship, because we understand that it's something he rejects and not something he instituted. Okay? So, although those do have their own types and shadows, but you understand what I'm saying. Hopefully you're tracking that far. In addition to the lost types and shadows that we're not getting, we're also missing out on the practical aspects of certain commands, and it really obfuscates, makes it less clear, certain biblical truths when we cut out a portion of that doctrine. So this session is going to be aimed at undoing some damage in our scriptural understanding, if we can. I'm going to go way out on a limb and not cover any ground on the concept of biblical patriarchy, which would take some time, whole different video, whole different series probably. And I'm going to assume that you already know that God's not a feminist, and he doesn't believe in gender equality as we understand it to be. If you don't know that, hopefully at some point in the future I'll upload a session relating to that, because it is pertinent information, and it is right next door to this doctrine, if you want to think of it that way, and therefore not safe to ignore. The first thing to be aware of is, remember how when I told you, where we look for these types and stuff? Well, one of them is how we're created, and then what became of it after the Garden of Eden, and then what the patriarchs do. So let's talk about those patriarchs for a second. Abraham was a polygamist. Jacob was a polygamist. Moses was a polygamist. Samuel's dad was a polygamist. David was a polygamist. Solomon was a polygamist. There were more polygamous guys than that, but that should do for now, because those five guys they're fairly good guys, as good as guys can get, and they were all used by God, and none of them were rebuked at any time for having more than one wife. Now that isn't to say that none of those guys weren't involved in sins, or even sexual sins. David certainly was an adulterer, and God's rebuke to him, in addition to the judgment that he brought against him, well, God's rebuke was that if David's 6 wives weren't enough, God would have given him more. Not, you shouldn't take more than one wife. David already had like 6 of them. He said, and God said, if that wasn't enough, I'd have given you more. And Solomon took wives from forbidden tribes, and I do want to say that truthfully, he did take too many wives. He had 1,000 women all told. And the law does say, and he should know the law, right? That a king was not to multiply wives. And when you get up to 1,000 wives, there's 300 concubines, 700 wives, something like that. But when you get up to, a grand total of 1,000, you've engaged in multiplication. We're not talking about addition anymore. You are multiplying wives. So he did transgress in two ways, both with women. His thing wasn't that he had more than one. It was just that he had, multiplied, and that they were from forbidden tribes. Abraham, he did try to fulfill God's promise using the slave woman Hagar as a surrogate, and he had to send her away. He wasn't really rebuked for having more than one wife, and he certainly wasn't rebuked for any of the concubines he had. But he did have to, when his wife said, "Hey, send this girl and her son away," Abraham wasn't very happy about it. God says, actually, yes, because the son of the slave woman will not inherit, and that there are some types and shadows in that we're not even going to try right now. Jacob's son slept with one of his brother's mothers, and that was awful, right? Not necessarily Jacob's fault, but that happened. But Moses and Samuel's dad Elkanah, they seem to be mostly in the clear as far as sexual sins go, even though they happen to be polygamist, right? Moses had more than one wife. There's some debate on that, but I kind of fall on the side that says, of course he did. And Samuel's dad Elkanah, he certainly had more than one wife, and he wasn't rebuked. And the point is that God never sees fit to tell any of these men that they should not ever take more than one wife. In fact, moving on from the patriarchs and into the law, in the law that God gave Moses, the taking of additional wives was a commandment under the penalty of public disgrace. If a man's brother was married and died without producing an heir, and you can read all about that in Deuteronomy chapter 25. I'm not going to read it, but I might put it up on the video. Deuteronomy chapter 25. The law also regulated how to treat and deal fairly with multiple wives in Exodus chapter 21. That's Exodus chapter 21. And it regulates the inheritance that must go to the firstborn son, even if a man is married to two women and doesn't like the woman that produced the child. So when God was about the business of handing down the commandments of what's right and what's wrong, he didn't outlaw polygamy. He just told them how to do it correctly. And if a man has multiple women as wives, you need to understand right at the outset that it does not in any way offend God that he's doing that. As a matter of fact, in certain circumstances, God recommends it and says it's a shame to you if you don't. I mean, in that Levirate law that I'm not going to read in its entirety, if the guy doesn't want to take his brother's widow and produce an heir with her, if he doesn't want to do that, and he's like, no, I'm not going to marry her, she's too much baggage, whatever, what I mean? He's allowed to say no. It's not an outright command. You have to do this. But the penalty for it is she gets to take his shoe from him, one of his shoes from him, and she gets to spit in his face in public. Okay. So it's not so much of, it's kind of optional. Yeah, it's optional to say no, but if you say no to polygamy when God recommends it, it's a shame, and and the widowed lady, well, she's allowed to spit in your face in front of everybody. Okay, that's what's prescribed by the law. Holy smokes, one of the lesser known penalties of the Bible. So because just about everyone doesn't prefer this lifestyle, or it finds it rubs them completely the wrong way, well, that really is completely beside the point. If you've got a Bible open in front of you, hopefully it's there so that you can change your mind to suit what's written and not the other way around. Change your mind, change your mind, change your mind. Okay, that's what repentance means. Change your mind. Change your mind about this. Repent. Stop looking at it like it's a sin or a dirty compromise or some undesirable, humiliating thing. God doesn't see it that way, and neither should you. All right. Now that I've said that, it's not to say that it's necessarily for you, okay, or that you should want it for yourself, okay? Celibacy is a very good thing, arguably the best thing, and I can say that I don't want it for myself, and the Bible says that's completely okay and to be expected. You can't walk every viable path. you can't be expected to want every viable path. But we do have to open our minds to the scriptural truth of every viable path and not condemn them. A principle that you need to be aware of is that there are no scriptural truths that are safe to ignore. I'll say it again. There are no scriptural truths that are safe to ignore, and there are no doctrines that are not worth fully understanding. Okay? They're all valuable, and they all have application. So now I've talked about how in the past, polygamy was accepted, regulated, and instituted both in the lives of the patriarchs before the law and within the body of the law itself. And I understand that there are a great many Christians for whom that doesn't necessarily mean anything, and that's a shame. And I'm a New Testament guy all the way. I'm not even close to a Torah keeper. You know what I mean? I'm not involved in trying to observe the law. All right, but most Christians, knowing that we're not under the law, they feel greatly at their liberty to disregard to incredible degrees the parts of the law that they happen to disagree with. That's not an appropriate way to deal with it. Just because we're not under the law doesn't mean we get to ignore the law. Okay. What do we do with the law? Oh boy, that's probably a different video, but learn from it is the summation. Because it tells you what's right, it tells you what's wrong, it tells you what God's attitude is about things. I mean, it tells you what God thinks about things. God outlaws things because they're wrong. He regulates things because there's a way to regulate them. He institutes things because they're correct. Just saying that we're not under the law, therefore we get to ignore God's entire opinion of right and wrong is the stupidest thing you could do. And it's kind of doctrine in the church, to one degree or another. And we're going to skip the present because the present is sort of covered in 1 Corinthians 7:2 as far as that goes. You know what I mean? It's just like, and it continues to be okay to be polygamous. And the reason I want to skip to the present because I want to go to the future. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, it says, and this is a prophecy, it says, for 7 women will take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach. In that day the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth will be the pride and adornment of the survivors of Israel. Right, the survivors. This is post-Armageddon, okay? Hopefully you're savvy enough to understand that this refers to the beginning of what we call the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, is that, when the Lord returns and rules the whole earth from Jerusalem for 1,000 years. If you don't quite get that, read the rest of the chapter, it should become clear. If you don't believe in any such thing as the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, excuse me, you do have a lot of preliminary work to do in eschatology, in the prophecies, in the prophets, before even bothering about marriage in the age to come. This is really a small part of what's coming. But if you're still on board, you have to understand that the day that Jesus is glorified in the earth, there will be a sudden resurgence of polygamy. Okay? Polygamy is just going to start taking off as soon as Jesus arrives and is glorified. Not because of scarcity, because obviously good times are actually on their way. When Jesus shows up, good times are on their way. All right? After he gets done killing people and wading in their blood. That is neither here nor there. After that, good times are on their way because the government will be upon his shoulders, right? And everything is going to finally be the way it's supposed to be. But it's not because of scarcity, because the women in the text are not looking for a meal ticket. They're in fact, the women offer to pay their own way, and in completely, unashamedly polygamous marriage, just to secure for themselves the more honorable name of the man that they are accosting on the street. Really, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're saying. Okay, this is incredible. And I don't know what's so bad about their own name that they need to take on this guy's name. I have a couple of theories, but neither of my theories are necessarily grounded in anything except my own speculation, so I'm going to spare you that. So not only does the Father in the distant past institute and regulate polygamous marriage, but in the near future, our soon coming King will institute and regulate polygamous marriage when he begins his perfect reign on earth on David's throne. So, You dust off your ideas of the antiquity of patriarchal families, because polygamy, it's the future. Okay? Oh, it's also worth noting Revelation chapter 21, verses 10 through 12. It says, "And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as the stone of a crystal clear jasper. It had a high and great wall with 12 gates, and at the 12 gates 12 angels, and the names were written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel." So, I mean, please do try to wrap your mind around this. The New Jerusalem is descending from heaven, having the glory of God. It has 12 gates with the names of the 12 sons of Israel written on them. So do you understand that from the foundation of the earth, God has always intended those names to be right where they are, and will be, and will always be? And so whenever anyone enters the New Jerusalem for all eternity, they will enter under the name of one of those boys, one of those sons of Jacob. And all those boys were produced out of one man's very awkward and tumultuous polygamous relationship. God really did inscribe polygamy on his own eternal city. So really, get comfortable with that concept. You know, don't ignore it, because you are gonna walk in under one of those names, and it doesn't matter which name you enter in under. It's the name of a kid that was produced from polygamy. You know. And they're all legitimate gates. There would never be an illegitimate gate to the to the gates to the New Jerusalem. Polygamy is a part of God's plan. It's woven into the past. It's allowed in the present. It's prophesied in the future, and it's inscribed in eternity. Oh man, swallow it down, chew it up, get it. Having handled that, let's move on to the why. Why polygamy? Why something that just messes with our ideas of what marriage is supposed to be? Well, I want to tell you that at the very top, in the pictures and those shadows that we were supposed to be caring about, just like the mystery of marriage it's a portrait of Christ in the church. Well, a marriage with multiple women is a mirror of the fact that God himself is a polygamist. In Jeremiah 3, God depicts himself as being very angry at the behavior of his two wives, Israel and Judah. The parable of the wise and foolish virgins that Christ told, it has 10 virgins, and they're all waiting for the same bridegroom. And in the teaching, that bridegroom can only be taken to mean Christ himself. As the Father is, so is the Son. The Father, he's got the wives of, in Jeremiah, he's got Israel and Judah. Well, Christ has 10 bridegrooms in this parable. Sorry, no. Christ has 10 virgins waiting for him to marry them in this parable. Also, Christ tells them in John 10:16 that he has other sheep not of this fold. Okay, he's the good shepherd, but he's got more than one flock, you understand. There's the church, right? And there's also Israel. Of course, he was talking to Israel. He meant the church, or he meant the Gentile church, possibly. But either way, there's two distinct groups of people that are saved and belonging to Christ. There are the church, and there is Israel. And you need to understand that they're not the same thing. When it says all Israel shall be saved, it does not mean that all Israel shall respond to the gospel and be part of the church. I don't think so. And I think if you really look at it with your actual eyeballs, you'll see the same thing. All Israel shall be saved when they acknowledge their offense in the midst of a massive persecution, and then they'll see Jesus with their own eyes, and then they'll weep like men and women bereft of their only son. And for the time being, though, right now, they're enemies for our sake. There are enemies for our sake because of the gospel. They've been cut off, remember? They were cut off so we can be grafted in. We're not the same branch. They're not, they are a completely different branch that will be regrafted in. And they are still beloved, even though they're our enemies, and they're going to drag us into, eventually they're going to drag us into the synagogues again, right? I mean, if that's what Luke 21 is supposed to mean, and I think it does. We're going to be persecuted by the Jews again because of the gospel, but nonetheless, they are still beloved because of the patriarchs and the promises he made to them. God has a relationship with Israel that operates in kind of a distinct manner from us, his church. We're his bride, but we're not the only thing he's got going on. Okay, so there's the tippy top of my understanding of what polygamy is supposed to be about. Below that, underneath that, you realize that anybody that's got a sexual desire and no spiritual gift to control it, well, they're supposed to get married. Right? We've gone over that. 1 Corinthians 7, right? And supposedly, we're not allowed to be yoked together with unbelievers, right? You're not supposed to go around marrying a non-Christian because you're trying to be pulled upward, and they are always going to be pulled downward. There's no fellowship between light and darkness. Why would you get married to them? I'm not going to belabor that because probably your church teaches the same thing already. Additionally, all widows below the age of 60 are supposed to remarry according to our Bible. 1 Timothy chapter 5, starting in verse 9, it says, a widow is to be put on the list if she is not less than 60 years old, having been the wife of one man, having a reputation for good works, and if she's brought up children, and if she shows hospitality to strangers, if she's washed the saints' feet, if she has assisted those in distress, and if she's devoted herself to every good work, tall order, but refuse to put younger widows on the list. For when they feel sensual desires in disregard of Christ, they want to get married, thus incurring condemnation because they set aside their previous pledge. At the same time, they also learn to be idle, as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Therefore, I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach. For some have already turned aside to follow Satan. Okay, so just a quick note on the aside. Does your church keep a list of widows to support? Don't even try to lie. They don't. I've never heard of it. Neither of you. Keep it under your hat, though, because that's not what we're talking about. But think about it. Returning to the point at hand, Paul asserts that widows younger than 60 can't handle being single and shouldn't receive support from the church. Wow. He says they need to get married or they're going to go completely sour and bring reproach to the church. I mean, that's my paraphrase, but I'm not off the mark. Those were Paul's words, moved by the Holy Spirit, not mine. He says they're gonna. They also learn to be idle. They're going to go around house to house, and not just idle, but also gossips and busybodies. You don't like it, take it to the Father. Add to that, like I said, Paul's words, moved by the Holy Spirit, not my words. I didn't write it. Add to that any man who possibly can is supposed to forego women in order to celibately devote themselves to the Lord, which we already saw in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Not to mention Jesus' own teaching on the matter. We've already handled that. So now add that Paul commands men, or Paul's commandment in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. He says in verse 34, the women are to keep silent in the churches, for they're not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves, just as the law also says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper for a woman to speak in church. And women who want to learn anything are not allowed to speak in church, but must ask their own husbands at home. Don't get mad at me. Okay, I'm reading the Bible. Okay, I didn't add my own words in there. And really, if I was Sosthenes and I was taking dictation from Paul while he was telling me what to write, I would have stopped him there. I promise you I would have. I'd have said, "Holy smokes, Paul! Are you sure you want me to write that down? You can't just tell the women to shut up in church. You have any idea how pissed off the Corinthians are going to be? They're not even going to receive 2 Corinthians. Okay, they're going to see it and they're going to say, "Return to sender." Holy smokes, But it just so happens I was not Sosthenes. Sosthenes was Sosthenes. He wrote it. Paul said it. The Spirit moved it. The Father intended it from the foundation of the earth. It's there on purpose. So if you want to argue with someone about it, take it to the Father. Wrestle with him about it. I mean, Jacob wrestled with the Father, and he came out of it a better man, if a bit gimpy. So not only does Paul tell you, and I don't know if it was the Father. He could have been wrestling with Jesus for all I know. I just know he wrestled with God. Okay, get off me. So not only does Paul tell you that young widows should get married, he also says that they need to be quiet in church and can't even speak Not even to ask a question. Yowzer! Paul assumes they've all followed his advice from chapter 7, so obviously all these women have men at home to ask their questions to in chapter 14. You see how they hang together, okay? If you're not paying any, if you cut out chapter 7 because you didn't like it, by the time you get to chapter 14, you are completely up a certain creek as far as following the commandments there. If you don't do what's in the beginning, you have no ability for the end. You can't follow through on something you've never started. So, if you really intend to follow the Bible in a manner that makes it more than just a loose set of guidelines, okay? If you want to take the Bible literally and you want to do what God actually said to do, all right, what he inspired his servants to say, well, then what happens to the number of women who desire a husband if it exceeds the number of good, godly men who are also single? Or what happens to a Christian woman whose unsaved husband walks away from her because she's under no compulsion to demand that he stays, right? I mean, I'm not gonna quote it, but you know what I'm talking about. It's in 1 Corinthians. Should they all get married to non-Christians and unwisely hope that the lifestyle they lead will win their godless husbands over? I mean, well, no, obviously not. Well, should they hang around the youth room waiting for the next generation of young men to turn 18, kind of snap them up before the other little girls can get at them? I'm just going to guess that that's not a very desirable practice, So where are all these godly young bachelors supposed to be being manufactured, Is it the evangelist corps? They just need to go out there and really do a good job, I mean, yes, they should, but, it's kind of beside the point. Who can take in these women and their children? Right? You're going to saddle a 18-year-old kid? I'm going to go to college or take care of this lady and her 3 kids because her husband died, Not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying, less desirable. Well, no. And how do we make sure that there's enough godly men to take care of these women without dipping into the number of celibate men who are supposed to be leaving alone so they can dedicate themselves to the Lord, Where, in addition to all this stuff going on, we're supposed to be, making sort of a culture where these celibate men are allowed to be celibate men, and we just leave them the heck alone and not pressure them to get married, right? The men in the church should be taking care of the women in the church. That's what the Bible says. And polygamy should be viewed as a legitimate avenue to address that. It shouldn't be a weird taboo. It should be a regular practice of the church. I just know you're fighting me on this, so I want to drag this back to basics. The biblical teaching on men, women, marriage, celibacy, polygamy, it's very clear, and it is entirely consistent. It's entirely consistent from the Old Testament to the New Testament, okay? Obviously divorce drops off, but that's not going to be a surprise to us because he already told Malachi that it would. He already gave Malachi the warning before the New Testament even dropped, before Jesus ever told them divorce wasn't an option. Malachi already told you that God hates divorce, okay? God always tells his prophets what's going on, okay? God never told his prophecy that polygamy was going away. Matter of fact, he told us, like I've handled before, he told us it's going to be in the future and in eternity to a certain extent. I'm not saying that marriage will exist for the resurrected. I'm not that kind of a guy. But, the gates. Remember the gates? You get me. The Bible's clear on this. It's entirely consistent. It never changes its mind there. The only thing that makes it unclear for us is that we don't happen to like it, and we have this feeling that all true Scripture is Scripture that tells us what we already know, or we already suspected, or what we find pleasant. We all have this idea that if it's the right doctrine, then we'll just know it when we read it, and it'll give us this warm and fuzzy feeling, because a lot of times it does, right? When you came to Christ, you just knew it was the right thing, Well, it's not all like that. Sometimes God tells you things that you completely disagree with, but you don't know as well as he does. And do you think that it's safe to live in a way that makes biblical teaching on these things irrelevant? Do you have any idea how spiritual warfare even works? It's not safe. a lifestyle or an attitude that's outside scriptural guidance, well, that's an undefended side that you are going to fall to attack to over and over and over again, and you are not gonna you're not gonna be able to defend it consistently. I mean, do you really think that the single young moms of today are going to be immune to going sour like Paul says they will, just because the church isn't supporting them? Do you think that it's a better solution if they have their own jobs and are the head of their own households, which is kind of, that's outside of what the Bible recommends? Well, how much grace and mercy from the Father are you hoping he's going to pour out to defend you and the church from the things that you're weak to when you don't even make the attempt to combat them in the way that he has ordained? Don't be fooled. The scripture is God-breathed. Don't just be a hearer of the word, but also a doer. A lot of people are a hearer of the word and a disagreeer of the word, conscientious objectors of the word. That's retarded. Pardon my language. Now, I want to take a minute to address what the Bible does not say. The Bible doesn't say that a man with more wives is more pleasing to God. Definitely not. The Bible doesn't say that a woman should be one of many wives in order to please God. That's not what the Bible says at all. And the Bible definitely does not say that the elders of the church should have many wives. As a matter of fact, the Bible says that if an elder or a deacon, if a man wants to be an elder or a deacon, he must have one wife. They're supposed to be the spiritual leaders and public servants. The rank and file Christians are supposed to pick up the slack when it comes to providing homes for all the women. The abuses of certain sects that teach that any people that must be part of a polygamous marriage, they're teaching error. And that error is motivated by the lust of the flesh, covetousness, and pride. And I hope that doesn't come to a shock to you, because that really is a no-brainer, okay? That the error comes because of lust, covetousness, and pride. And, and am I saying that it's not about sex? No. If we were paying attention to the last few videos, we'd all know that all marriage is about sex. There's this attitude that polygamy is evil because it leads to men having more sex with more partners, and therefore, if he's enjoying himself sexually, it must be wrong. The same argument could be applied to monogamous marriage, but we don't go down that road. Of course, marriage is about sex, and more marriage means more sex. What do you want? An apology? I'm not going to give you one, because then I'd be apologizing for God. You can forget it. I will say that even though all marriages are about sex, sex isn't all marriage is about. As a married man myself, I can testify that I spend most of my time in the marriage not having sex. Work, kids' school, kids' sports, eating, sleeping, talking, quality time with the whole family, and all that stuff, not to mention the things that I busy myself with, like Bible studies and prayer nights, and spending time making YouTube videos for precisely nobody. Sex is the primary reason to get married, but by no means is it even close to the majority of what takes place. It just so happens to be that sex is what I enjoy the most, right? I'm not going to apologize for that either, by the way. What I am saying is that the line between monogamy and polygamy in the Bible is a line that most people within the church do not have to concern themselves with. Elders and deacons have to concern themselves with that because there's a commandment associated with them, but for the most part, there's no line. Here's what needs to happen. Christian ladies that don't have the gift of celibacy, they only need to get married if they're of marriageable age. And if that means that some have to marry men that already have a wife, well, that's what needs to go down. And the church needs to accept that our stuffy attitudes about polygamy are just that, stuffy attitudes. You will find that Scripture becomes much more easy to follow and much more understandable when you don't apply a monogamy-only lens to marriage. So in brief, here is my 5-point plan of what needs to happen. First, the church needs to preach the biblical account of marriage, not our culture's account. Not the account of our culture. Polygamy should not be preached against. Don't call something that isn't a sin. All right? Don't disagree with God, church. Second, we need to stop teaching our children that polygamy is a sin, and explain that people that abuse girls are wrong because they abuse girls, not because they happen to have more than one wife. Okay? There is a difference between having more than one wife and abusing, women. Forcing people to get married and, and abusing your authority over the women that you've got, that's wrong. Having more than one wife, not wrong. All right, there's a difference. Third, all men should keep whatever vows they've made to their wives. If you've, which for most people, your marriage vow included some sort of language for exclusivity. It was probably something like, and forsaking all others. Okay, so men, if you made that vow, keep that vow, forsake all others, and don't even bring it up, is what I say. I'm not saying it's unbiblical to ask to be let off of a vow. I'm just saying that it's kind of a cheese thing to do. And it very well might be unbiblical, but I would advise just not even bringing it up. You know what I mean? Keep your vow the way you said it. God has a real thing for men that keep their vows, even to their own hurt. And if your own hurt is that you only have one wife, well, it's not that much of a hurt, guys. You're gonna get over it. But at the same token, the wives, however, should indeed release their husbands from that very vow. Their husbands should be freed to do what's best for the church. So, guys, if you've made a vow, keep it. Wives, if your husband's made a vow, release it. At your leisure. Fourth, men who are not under any such vow, well, they should restrain themselves from ever taking that vow. Just tell them, hey, listen, I'm not going to say forsaking all this. We wrote our own stuff or whatever. And explain to their intended wife that they may at some later date take another wife if it becomes something that he thinks should happen. All right. Will that lead to the end of your relationship? It very well might. Yeah, take the hit, man. Or not. You could wuss out, whatever. Fifth, men should begin making and accepting offers of polygamous marriage, and sort of clean up the overages of unattached women that still desire a mate within the church. If they need to be taught, and if they're not allowed to ask questions in the church, and they need to have their own husband to ask questions to, well, men should provide husbands to ask questions to. It's a no-brainer. Somebody's got to make the effort. But I also want to apply my little 5-point plan for reintroducing polygamy to our culture. I want to apply that to celibacy as well. Okay, first of all, the church needs to preach the biblical account of celibacy, how it's not commanded, but encouraged for those that can hack it. The church needs to stop pressuring people who don't need marriage to get married. And it needs to encourage the body to cherish and accept celibate members. Okay, we need our celibate guys to be celibate, doing what God leads them to do. Second, we need to accept that some of our children, some of our children are going to be celibate, either by nature or by gift, and we need to impress upon them that they're not defective, but God gave them a gift, and they should use it for His glory, and they should give themselves entirely to His purposes in their life. And third, men should keep whatever marriages that they're already in, even if they suddenly realize that they never needed a wife in the first place. But unlike before, wives should definitely not try to give their husbands their freedom in this regard, because that definitely means divorce, and God hates divorce. So it's not quite the same at this point. If your husband's like, oh my goodness, it turns out I never needed you, lady, don't take that too personally. Man, don't say it. Shut your face. If you're already in a marriage, just love your wife. The commandment is the same, whether you need it or not. You're in one, so love your wife. Fourth, men who aren't married and find that they're gifted in the ability to be celibate, well, they should forswear women entirely now. Do it now, and declare yourself to be celibate, and dedicate all of your advancement and dedicate all your energy to the advancement and growth of the kingdom. Only you know if you have the ability to be celibate. Don't try to be celibate if you're not, but if you are, if you know that you've got the gift, if you're like, oh, you know what, it's been 5 years since I even cared, well, you're probably celibate. Leave it alone. I know women, sometimes you yearn for companionship, you know what I mean? But if that's all it is, if you don't actually have the sex drive where you need, well, then you can find that companionship. You can find companionship in the Holy Spirit. You can find it with Father. You can find it with Jesus. You better believe you can. I have. You know what I mean? You're never alone, man. You're never alone. And it is the better way. Fifth, according to my understanding of Scripture, women are not quite at their liberty for self-determination. I'm not even prepared to launch into the scriptural patriarchy. I already told you that I wouldn't. But suffice it to say that I do believe that women can have the gifts of celibacy as well. And if they can live celibate and unmarried, then they should indeed do so, devoting themselves entirely to the Lord. Like I said, this is going to be a little bit more involved. Just look up what the Bible says about women, marriage, authority, and childbearing, and you're going to quickly see that the biblical approach to female celibacy is going to be nuanced. I'm not going to handle those nuances here, because we're supposed to be talking about polygamy. But anyways, with all these things that I've spoken about, will these fix the problems of today's church or today's society or today's Christian culture? No, these are not going to fix all of our problems. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing. But you can expect some blessings to come from the attempt to more fully live your life by God's word. Obviously, this is simply one aspect of today's Christian culture that has run far afield of what the Word of God actually describes. We need to tackle all the sectarianism within the church, right? We need to tackle all the secularism that has, I don't want, crept into the church, is what they say, but has completely overtaken the church in some places. We need to address the lack of personal holiness within the church. We need to address the neglect of the gifts of the Spirit and the authority of Christ within the church. We need to tackle organizing the church according to biblical patterns. We need to tackle our ideas of where our material goods go and what should be done with it when it gets there. And I'll tell you straight up that the church is in a miserable state compared to where it should be. We're completely wrecked because we have substituted our own doctrines in the place of what God's put forth in His Word. We're like a football team that is ignoring the head coach and has not studied the playbook and is just getting stomped out on the field where we should be dominating. Our approach to biblical marriage, including our approach to celibacy and polygamy, is just one way. It's one place where we're falling short. Every man that doesn't need a wife, well, he should burn brightly for the Lord. Every man that does need a wife should get married and leave off the sexual immorality. Okay? Because if he does need a wife and he doesn't have one, well, he's gonna engage in sexual immorality. I mean, Paul said so. Every woman who desires a husband and children should have a godly husband to care for, even if that means polygamy. So let's correct all wrong and rebellious thinking, and let's submit to the wisdom of the Almighty. In this and every other aspect, every other place where we've departed from the Word, we need to get back to the Word. Our ideas are just stupid ideas compared to what God has ordained for us. We don't have any better ideas than He did. We don't understand good and evil like He does. He sees the picture in greater depth and breadth and detail than you ever will. So trust that. Change your mind. And try not to hate me too much for saying it. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Love you lots. Bye.